Okay, so this is a little solo download one on AI and embodiment. So myself, some colleagues and friends have been looking into this. I think like many people, pretty interested in it just in the last few months. Where to begin? First of all, it's moving very quickly, isn't it? So if you're listening to this in the future, wearing Lycra, maybe I'm completely wrong in predictions that I'm going to give, and it may well be out of date even within a few weeks, let alone a few months. However, I think it's a pretty interesting topic. So yeah, here's a few thoughts on it. First of all, just generally, I think many of us in the embodiment space who are working online are going to be put out of work. Simple as that. There tends to be a sort of arrogance when any new technology comes in, when people say, not me, my customers want me, my customers won't put up with this. The problem is that price and ease win. So, for example, Uber, is it as good as a normal taxi company? No, it's not as good as a London cabbie who knows their way around London and blah, 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 blah. But it's convenient, it's easy, and often it's cheaper, so it wins. Let's imagine, I'll start with examples outside of our industry first, because I think that will highlight what I'm talking about. So, and I'm going to bring it back to those of us who are online yoga teachers and coaches and things like that. So let's say a lawyer. Okay, so let's say my lawyer, I pay £200 an hour for a solicitor to get his advice. You know, every 20-minute phone call I have costs £200. It's just bloody ridiculous. Why? Because he's an expert. He knows a lot of stuff. Keeps up to date with the different journals, different precedents, different court cases. He knows how to research stuff. So there's like, let's say, you know, there's an international thing, someone hasn't paid me who's in Canada or whatever. He can look that up. Now, an AI can look that up instantly. AI can be informed way more quickly, way better, have all the cases just immediately to hand, and essentially provide better information, certainly as good. Now, am I going to, and it might cost, say, £20 an hour to use. So am I going to pay 10 times as much? You know, it's just a scalable thing, right? Am I going to pay 10 times as much because I like my friend Andrew and it's nice to talk to him and maybe there's some human touch? No, yeah, just no. An equivalence here would be, say, suits. So when suits started being machine made, were they as good as handmade suits? No, they still aren't. You know, a beautiful Italian handmade suit is still much nicer than the average sort of off-the-rack suit you can buy for £200. But it's going to cost you £2,000 minimum to get a tailor, you know, bespoke, to be measured, to go through that whole process. Plus, I have to go in, you know, it takes several fittings sometimes. People just can't be bothered. So, yes, there's still a very small bespoke market for tailoring or, you know, other handmade type things. But machines, essentially what machines have done for production, and you could say working class jobs, kind of jobs that can be replaced with a machine, this is going to do for white collar jobs. Actually, many blue collar jobs are going to be irreplaceable. So a plumber may still use the AI to get information, but there still needs to be a guy, you know, turning the thing under the tap, and robots are a long way off that. So I'm talking about sort of AI without hugely sophisticated robot bodies, okay? The kind of language-based models that we see, people don't know what these are. Maybe you should take a step back, because I know some of the embodiment crowd, you know, don't keep so up to date. It's something that learns is the key thing. So at first, these things were kind of clumsy and crude, but the more examples they give, the more they can learn. So you could type into it, you know, what is embodiment? That's one I tried. And actually, the answer it came back with was pretty good, maybe as good as I could come up with as one of the sort of, you know, top people in thinking about this field in the world. And it searches different online answers, and you also rate it, and you say, this is good or not good. Right. So it's a feedback loop. You can put in, I don't know, there's an example where Jordan Peterson has a book called 12 Rules of Life. He puts in his 12 rules and says, hey, make a 13th rule for me. Yeah. You know, or you see the art examples. Hey, make me a portrait of me that's halfway between Picasso and Salvador Dali. Yeah. And it can take all the pictures of Picasso, all the pictures of Salvador Dali, put them together, find a style. And this is how it was gathering a lot of people's information because of the old, it's funny, you know, this is how AI sees me because it's so intelligent. No, This is how AI fluffs you. This is how AI manipulates you. All the pictures, like, here's me as a space princess, and it would be like, oh God, this is your fantasy. It's just showing you your fantasies. It's showing you, because you pick certain pictures from it, right? It gives you 100 and you pick 5. It's learning what we want. Okay, it's wish fulfillment. It's going, okay, so of these 100 pictures, these 5 where you're a space queen looking really cool, that's what we like. So we're going to make more of them for the next person who wants a picture of themselves. So yeah, it's the ultimate narcissism, really. It's a machine that learns exactly what we want. Okay, back to our topic. So anything that is language-based can be done, if not now, very soon, quicker and better by AI. Let me give you some scary examples of this. So you've probably seen the deep fakes. Obama's wife said she was the only one she could tell the deep fake of Obama, which is a video from him. And that technology is getting cheaper and cheaper. So, for example, I follow a YouTube channel where Obama, Biden, and Trump are arguing about science fiction. Clearly, it's not the presidents, but it sounds just like them. They've used enough voice recordings to be able to reproduce their voice. So now your video can be produced, pretty expensive now, but that will get cheaper. The voice can be produced. That's already pretty cheap. And your words can be reproduced. So we can say, right, here's everything Mark Walsh has written on Facebook. Remember, I don't own that information. Here's 1,000 videos of Mark Walsh on YouTube. Great. Here's 400 embodiment podcasts. Great. Download the audio, turn it into a text file, look for the patterns. And then we can say what's something Mark Walsh might say about coaching, about trauma, about whatever, right? And based on all this information, they'd be able to make something that was scarily realistic. What is this going to lead to? So this is going to lead to problems with identity, trust, and certainly mass unemployment. This is already happening, actually. One of my Ukrainian friends, her sister works in blogging. So blogging is a big industry in Ukraine. It's kind of, tech industry. Now it takes it used to, people would write blogs for what's called search engine optimization. And previously, it would take 10 bloggers to make, however, 100 blogs or whatever, right? Now it just takes one blogger to supervise the ChatGPT, the AI, maybe looking at it. There is a skill in using it. I think this will become a meta skill. It'll become a super skill, the skill of, how do you put information in? I'm actually insisting my employees learn this skill because I don't want us as a company to be left behind. In the same way as there is a skill to Googling. I don't know if you remember back in the day, to ask Google a question like you're asking a person, like ask Jeeves. And then eventually you were like, okay, you kind of realize you had to do it slightly differently. So like that, but more so. Instead of being 10 bloggers, it's now one blogger. So 9 out of 10 bloggers will be losing their income. And this goes up to really quite sophisticated white collar jobs like a doctor. Okay. So, how much of what a doctor does is just based on symptoms? It's not really based on them looking at you, reading your psychometrics. Now, of course, you can have a watch that reads your blood pressure or something that you give to the virtual doctor. How much of what a doctor does is just saying, what are your symptoms? Well, you can tell a computer that, and it can come up with, way more sophisticated things. The 1 in 1,000 thing that doctors never heard of, that you have your local GPs never heard of, or what do they call that in America? I forget. GPs like the doctor you go to, family clinician. Yeah. On top of that, they may, if there was linked to video technology, they could look at your eye. Maybe you could give it a blood sample. There'd be an app for that, for example. It could plug it into your medical records, instantly see all your past medical records. Plug it in maybe to your Fitbit watch, says, your pulse and blood pressure and heart rate variability for the last 6 months. I mean, this could be wonderful for medicine in many ways. But what's lost there is, I think, any embodiment person is understanding the human touch. What is that? The co-regulation, the not being isolated, the many interact, and this is extending something that's been happening anyway, right? Like when I first took money out of the bank, I would literally go into the bank and talk to a teller and have an exchange in the small town that I grew up in. And then, of course, very soon after that, when I was, I think, probably a student, so I'd gone from 14 to say 18 or 19, I was getting it from a hole in the wall. I was getting it from a cash point. And very quickly, the idea of going into the bank just, would be ridiculous. So what's lost already and is going to be increasingly lost is the co-regulatory nature of life, the community, the connection. I think we're going to see a really huge spike in isolation, suicide, drug addictions, all the things that come with that, unfortunately. Okay, so let's take this back to embodiment teachers. How many of you mostly teach with language? Yeah. So if you do, you can be replaced. Okay, relatively soon. But you say, yeah, but what about video? What about, but my expressiveness, I have a lot of expressiveness when I teach online. Yeah, okay, so we can model that with video relatively soon. And also they can pick the perfect avatar. So maybe, they do a study and they realize that, 80% of embodiment students like mine are middle-aged women, and they go, you know what, a guy with a beard and short hair, maybe that's not the best avatar. Maybe we want, someone who's 50 and female and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, the correct gender, ethnicity, etc. So the avatar will be more effective than you. Scary, huh? What about, yeah, but is it interacting? Okay, so this is a step up. Yeah, so currently we have AI, which can be very clever, but isn't necessarily real-time interacting. That isn't as far out of reach as you might imagine. Let's take the example, let's say you do a Zoom workshop, like I do fairly regularly. There's eye tracking software that tells if people are paying attention. It could be like, hey, turn the humor up in this case. Humor is another one of those things actually that gives you some inoculation to this. AIs find humor very difficult. Humor and creativity, yeah. Actually, creativity less and less. Anyway, so it could have eye tracking software. It could actually see 200 people simultaneously and be looking at their level of engagement. Are they interacting? What you might think of as some magic skill is actually mostly just reading facial expressions. Yeah, it's not like reading the energy man holding the space. A lot of that, maybe not all of it, but a lot of that can be done by a machine. Okay, particularly if there's other software that's plugged into the Zoom or whatever. Wow, maybe just take a breath in some of this stuff, yeah? Also, what we are going to see is replacement intimacy. So this is particularly the case that we've made pursuing intimacy in the real world, as it were, much harder. It's much more dangerous, for example, to find a partner at work. It's very difficult for people to find friends. There's a lot of studies, particularly on men having very few friends and everyone having less friends than they used to. Families are more spread out now. Virtual working increasingly enables families to be more spread out. Kind of like, why would you not spread out before? It was like, okay, childcare from your parents is kind of one of the biggies, right? That's one of the last few remaining. And previously it was work. Previously it was work and school. So your kids are in school, or you were doing some educational program yourself, maybe, and you had to go to the supermarket for your job. Okay. Well, that is still the case in a few professions, like in the supermarket. There are less and less people actually work there with the machines there. But more and more, particularly of the white collar jobs, you don't have to go into the office anymore. It's virtual. After COVID, people were like, well, hang on a minute, why are we even paying for an office? Companies were like, is this even worth it? What I think those companies will find is that over time, they get less loyalty, less discretionary effort. People have more burnout, more illness as a result of the lack of co-regulation. You won't get the same loyalty as when you have an office. And interestingly, one of my friends and competitors actually chose to have an office in England and pay people more money. I've chosen to have a distributed team, but I make quite a lot of effort to see them. Like we're getting together in Barcelona in the near future. I fly out regularly to see them. I invite them to live events. So there is that trust. And what I noticed is when I didn't have that, employees would just leave. They just disappear one day and say, I'm not coming in, because they'd already had another job because of what's called the gig economy. They could easily get another job. So I was like, shit, where do they go? Yeah. So in order to build some sense of loyalty, in order to build some sense of, co-regulation, so it feels good, you want to come into work. Like I have this online to some degree, but it's like I saw Stephen Leela, who I work with, when I was in a really bad mood a couple of days ago. It's so nice to see them, it's just uplifting. It's not quite as nice though if I was having coffee with them before work, right? Or going for lunch with Steve, or, Stephen Leela going for a beer after work or whatever. They're the sort of team that runs a lot of our marketing. It's quite a small company, by the way. For those of you who don't know, I employ about 7 people. Anyway, so that's virtual working, which is kind of an aspect here, which I think is worth discussing alongside AI. But AI really magnifying that. And many of our jobs simply can be replaced. if you're teaching online. So what can't be replaced? This is, how do you AI proof yourself or your business if you're an embodiment teacher? All right. First of all, I think there will always be a place for the real thing, in the same way as there's a small market for handmade Italian soups or homemade bread or something like that. You know, it's 10%, 5% of the market. And you'll get a sort of certification, like organic, you know, that's probably that's kind of a fun one, right? You know, real, you know, human made. And I think that will still be seen as a sort of high status thing, but it won't be affordable by most. And most of the people doing it will be at work. In order to compete with AI, they have to charge massive prices, which means most people are priced out. So it could still be like a very high status thing. You will see a lot of resistance kind of from alternative people, hippies, etc., to going to AI. But like with Uber, like with Deliveroo, like with so many of these things, ease and finance, ease and money win. They win every fucking time. Okay. Unfortunately, so we will see a movement to it, perhaps slower in our industry than in some others. I think lawyers, for example, will suffer much faster, much quicker. Yeah. All right. So many of the things we do online will be replaced. What can't be replaced, at least not for a long time? So face-to-face workshops. One reason I keep doing face-to-face workshops, even though it's only a small part of our business. There's a few reasons. I mean, I enjoy it. I learn a lot. They're big reasons. But it's also to future-proof my business against AI. So a robot is unlikely to replace face-to-face. Co-regulatory skills there. I also think, and this almost happened with COVID, but people weren't quite smart enough, that it will highlight the importance of co-regulation. So at the moment, we're talking about like mental health crisis, right? But what we're really seeing is a technologically driven, dehumanized, impersonal society doesn't fucking work. I'll say that again, it doesn't fucking work. Let's just be honest, it's fucking horrible for people. Excuse my language. I feel strongly about this. So this AI kind of revolution may kind of underline the co-regulatory qualities, or it may mean they're super valuable. Jobs like plumber, as I said, might become super valuable. That might become a very sought after, desirable job because an alien? Fucking hell, where did that come from? Aliens taking over, tinfoil hat. The AI can't do that job. It's very difficult to do that job. Might enhance it, might replace aspects of it. The booking of the plumber will almost certainly be done by an AI customer service agent. The sales of the plumbers might end up working for AI. Here's a scary thought, isn't it? So let's take marketing, right? We do our best in marketing. You know, we analyze emails, for example. We send, if you get an email from us, you're actually getting one of 5 subject lines, and we test which subject lines get the most opens. Right. So one might be called Spirituality Summit. One might be, you know, come to the Spirituality Summit. One might be, look who's on at the Spirituality Summit. We test that. It's called A/B testing or ABCDE testing in this case. But a machine learning doing that won't just test 5 emails. It will test 5 times 5 times 5 and keep iterating and keep iterating. That's what it's doing. Right. So plug that into a marketing machine and you're going to be highly targeted. The really scary one here is persuasion. So the first political party that gets an AI on its side, and this kind of is already happening with Silicon Valley being owned by liberals, essentially. There's a Democrat leaning in a lot of the social media, for example. It's kind of already happening. But this sort of 2.0 version, the stronger version, is an AI that can persuade you to do anything. Yeah, think about this. An AI that learns what persuades people. Perhaps it's got access to your data, so it can target your demographics. Perhaps it's done on via a computer where it can track your pupil dilation and blood flow, your pulse rate. You can read a pulse rate by looking at a camera by, for example, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see these little veins in my skull. Well, if you had a sensitive enough camera, you'd be able to see my pulse through those. So you can track your stress levels, your responsiveness, body language cues, which again could be culturally adapted, could be specifically individually adapted, and it could become the most persuasive thing ever. So basically the first political party to employ an AI may not only win the election, but make it so that there'll be no more elections. And it will convince everyone that that's fine. Absolutely terrifying thought. You look at the persuasive qualities of AI. Who has access to them? Who controls them? These things are not nearly being looked into enough. Let me reference a talk I've been listening to by someone smarter than me in Silicon Valley and way better informed. Tristan Harris is worth a look. And the talk is the AI Dilemma, March 9. Okay, the AI dilemma, Center for Humane Technology, really well worth a look if you want to. A lot of the ideas I got from him and his colleagues, so worth looking at. Okay, so what's future-proof? Anything involving touch. So body workers, yay, you're doing okay. Unless the AI persuades people not to get body work, of course. So body workers doing okay. Anyone teaching online, that's a problem. Anyone teaching in a very interactive way is a bit better. You might have a few more years, not many. In-person events, again, particularly involving touch, may well be future-proof to some extent. And a sense of humor. Now, this is where I feel a bit smug compared to my joyless German and American colleagues. A sense of humor, I think, is also one of the hardest things to impersonate, stimulate, model. So I don't want to be too arrogant there, because often I think AI can't do something. I look into it, it can, or it will very soon. But yeah, sense of humor may be helpful. So touch-based stuff may be very, very useful. We've also got to be looking at, okay, how are things presented? So many of you may have seen the Embodiment app. We've put on there a platform for online classes, right? So the reason we did that is severalfold. One, it's just for us, it's helpful, it's free, but it brings people to our app. You can find an online class there at a time that suits you, explore different teachers, discover new things. It's a gift to the whole world. It's fucking brilliant. And of course, it's good for us as a business because people then download our app and go on there. We don't charge for it. Why did I do that? Aside from the advantages for me, one altruistic reason is because if I didn't, someone else would. Okay, what does that mean? Well, he who controls the algorithm controls the world. We know this with Google. Google don't have to burn books. They just disappear information. Yeah, Facebook, we see this. If I put a reasonable post up on Facebook about embodiment, it's almost invisible. Yeah, to people. If I put a Facebook post saying something they don't like up, like I had one that had the word suicide in, questioning assisted suicide in Canada, completely invisible, utterly shadow banned. Yeah. So sometimes people get paranoid about this, but I mean, we're measuring the numbers. It's just kind of obvious. I do a post that will have 100 likes. I do a post an hour later or the next day and it will have 2 likes. It's like, okay, something's going on here. I don't think it's just a crap post. So in the same way social media controls what you can see, anyone who controls a platform also controls what can be seen and therefore who's successful in this field. So Amazon can make or break a book, for example, apps just by tweaking the algorithm. Social media companies can do this politically to swing voters, get them exposed to certain stories, not other stories. I think we need to be way, way more questioning about unelected liberal masters in the West Coast. And even if you are like super woke, super far left-wing person, who's to say that that group of people will keep owning those companies? Yeah, what about if just some oil billionaire just buys them out and says, right, now all social media that the Saudis buy them out and decide that, we want to keep selling oil. So anything to do with climate change is just going to be pushed down the algorithm. That is very easily done. If you see like Saudis buying big British football teams, for example, a lot of Hollywood is now controlled by China. You'll see very few pro-Tibet or anti-Chinese stuff. Yeah, the Chinese are running concentration camps, raping and murdering millions of people. People don't even know about this because it's never in the news, because most of the news have Chinese interests or sponsors with Chinese interests. Yeah, the news. Whose news? Okay, whose algorithm? Same thing. Woo! Got your tinfoil hat out yet? Yeah, I hope so. So in terms of online classes, how are they presented? Who controls that algorithm? What's their agenda? Is it political? We're trying to make ours, the Embodiment app, just simply as meritocracy-based as possible. By the way, most of the conferences that are out there, the online conferences that, people sort of impersonations there of the Embodiment conference and the like, they're not meritocracies. They're definitely racist. So they're reducing the number of white and male speakers in order just so not to get cancelled, and according to their own political biases. And of course, there's other biases like much more American speakers than non-American speakers, for example. The view of diversity in inverted commas is different colours of Americans normally. Yeah? You might get one Asian on there if you're lucky. And there's also a lot of what's called horse trading being done. So people that do affiliates, this is an expose actually of the industry. People that do affiliates say, hey, I'll share your thing and you share mine. Now we do that. I try and keep it ethical to people that I know do really good work. Like we won't just promote shit. Generally, we're promoting people like my friend Alex Howard or Fleet Mall, who are like mates. I know they do good work. I know their conferences are good. I know that there's some ethics and how they pick their speakers. But there's no major summit that isn't biased by financial factors, include just who's going to be seen, but also what's going to sell and also who they've got deals with. You know, you share my summit, I'll share yours. This is the nature of the industry we're in. If people, you know, there's a sort of baby boomer American mafia controlling it all. I was the young enfant terrible who crashed into the scene and people were like, who is this guy? You know, how dare he? He's not part of the club. I've since been somewhat excluded from that club, but I managed to keep going and making my own platforms and being innovative enough that they can't totally exclude me. And if they do, there's a price for them. So, you know, but I am the exception in terms of being an embodiment person who's also decent enough at business and decent enough at technology. That it's not the norm for most people. It's why, you know, part of my mission is to give a platform for people who aren't good at marketing. Right, at the summit we've had some new speakers, some innovative speakers. And, you know, not ones that we're just thinking, oh, they get a big audience because they're famous. You know, mostly people are just going with fame. You know, it's like, oh, great, they've got the famous big 3 or 4 names in trauma again. Okay, let's hear the same shit. It's easy to get cynical, isn't it? It's easy to get cynical. Okay, so AI, what could it mean? It could mean a global economic collapse. That might be very difficult. It could mean... if you haven't looked into it, this 15-minute city thing, I think that's well worth looking into. There was a great challenge to the local council in my area. If you look up Glastonbury Council 15-minute cities, let me see, I'll get her name for you. A very good talk by kind of a very local activist on this concept and kind of how technology is being brought in around that. Glastonbury Council meeting. Here, Glastonbury Town Council meeting, 14th of March. So Glastonbury Town Council meeting, 14th of March. It's very long, but there's extracts from that which are shorter, which are, you know, some very, very useful stuff in around technology in cities. It's important not to get too conspiratorial. It's important not to get paranoid, but I think it's also important to be vigilant that the freedoms we have in the Western world were hard won. And using technology, they're very easily replaceable. You know, the social credit system in China, the surveillance state of in Russia, for example. I have friends of mine in Russia that during COVID, they left the house and multiple times were picked up by facial recognition cameras and immediately just sent a bill, a fine for leaving the house, you know, when they weren't allowed to. So the technology is already there to keep people in their houses if you live in a city. Absolutely. Absolutely is. Okay, so there's a little bit on AI. I hope there's something useful in there. I think it's important to keep breathing, not to get paranoid, but do be vigilant. And I think we're going to see some rapid increases this year. One thing I haven't talked about, I probably should before wrapping up, is trust. It's going to be very difficult to trust anyone. Let's say someone phones you up and say, hey, Mum, it's little Johnny here. I need to come back from school early. When did you leave the key to the house again? How do you know it's their voice? Someone quite could have easily taken your child's voice off the internet. Yeah, could have quite easily done that from some TikTok videos they made, owned by China. Yeah. Okay, so how do you know you're talking to your child and not a scammer using an app? That's actually pretty easy technology. That is not science fiction, what I just said. Okay, when you see a news article and there's, I don't know, Zelensky saying, you know, he wants to surrender to Russia, say, right? How do you know it's Zelensky? Well, there's a sex scandal. It'd be very easy to make a virtual porno kind of thing with people's faces and, you know, the people in them. How do you know that's a real picture? How are you going to certify it? Yeah, so we're going to have I unfortunately think this will lead to paranoia. I think it will lead to more conspiracies, and it will lead to a complete breakdown in trust of the major institutions, which have already had a break in trust. People no longer trust the pharmaceutical companies. People definitely don't trust the mainstream media. I mean, even the phrase. It's a huge breakdown in trust. People don't trust their governments anymore. Remember stuff when I was a kid that was really fringe. I used to listen to Bill Hicks, the comedian, and he talked about, you know, corporations controlling government, you know, the puppets, the left hand on the right hand, the two puppets. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really radical and fringe. And now it just seems totally normal. Very, very like Russell Brand's huge following. We'll see that. So are we heading towards tech dystopia, a dehumanized world, economic collapse, decreasing crust, increasing paranoia? Let's find out. It's going to be a wild ride as ever. Anyway, there's my thoughts. Get in touch if you've got some more thoughts. Right, Walsh here. If you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF of my first book on embodiment, which seems to people like. We sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment with people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check those out.